You're watching Wisconsin Eye, an independent, nonprofit public affairs network, engaging the citizens of Wisconsin since 2007 through access to government proceedings and public policy events.
Hello everybody. Welcome to the Thanksgiving edition of the WisPolitics.com luncheon. We've never done one this close to a holiday, but judging by the crowd, oh, wait a minute, it must be the guests for the reason that we have this crowd. So thank you very much. I want to thank our sponsors, Hush Blackwell Strategies. They were the first sponsor of a WisPolitics luncheon, so thank you, Mike Rogowski and company. American Family Insurance, Xcel Energy, Walmart, ARP Wisconsin, and Anthem. So you should now applaud for the sponsors. Upcoming events in this room on December 15th, we have the elected leaders of Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee, David Crowley and Cavalier Johnson, here to talk about the city's relationship with the state, these two included. On January 11th, we've invited the Supreme Court candidates, 3, maybe 4, to be at a forum here, not a debate, but a forum on January 11th in this room, preceding the primary for the state Supreme Court and another big election in Wisconsin. And we have an invite out to Governor Evers for a February luncheon, maybe after the budget introduction. So stay tuned, go to WisPolitics.com for all events. So, we have very little to talk about, so it shouldn't take long at all. Let's start with the news of the day. And Senator LeMahieu, welcome. Congratulations on being a re-elected majority leader. So how many messages have you received from your caucus about how they want to spend $6.6 billion?
You know, surprisingly, our side isn't looking just to spend money. We're looking to reduce taxes. The news was exciting yesterday from DOA. Exciting, and it shows sort of the problem that we're facing in the state of Wisconsin right now. I mean, the reason our revenue is coming in so high right now is because inflation is, driving up the cost of goods, driving up the cost of incomes. Some of that's good, some of that's bad, and it's the challenge that we saw when we were out campaigning. One of the top issues that we heard was, the rising cost of living, but the benefit of that is our revenues go up in the state of Wisconsin. So we're watching the numbers as everybody has, and we were expecting a good report like this, maybe a little better than we expected, but having $6.6 billion or whatever number it is when the Fiscal Bureau does their estimate in January, which it might even be bigger at that point, plus the additional revenue in the next budget, we can make transformational tax changes to Wisconsin. We are going to propose them. We hope the governor signs them like he has in the past. But this is with whether we have $8 billion to work with, $9 billion to work with, once you factor in the revenue from the next budget session as well. It's exciting. It's very exciting that we can make transformational tax changes in Wisconsin, make us more competitive than our neighboring states, hopefully keep businesses in the state, get our neighboring neighbors to move into Wisconsin to enjoy those tax benefits, and that sets us up well, while also giving us money to invest in core priorities like K-12, roads, local government, and things like that. But I'm excited about the opportunity. We thought, when we were in the budget 2 years ago, and all of a sudden we had a $3 billion surplus, we're like, holy crap, what are we going to do with $3 billion? That's a small number compared to what we're working with now. So it gives us a great opportunity and responsibility to be wise with that money.
Okay, just before we go to Speaker Vos, so when you say tax changes, you're talking about a flat tax? Because that's, I think you've mentioned that before. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes, my goal would be, first to eliminate the personal property tax, which is something that the governor unfortunately vetoed out of the last, but that's That's cheap in comparison to everything else. That's only a couple $100 million. But then, yes, work on all the three brackets, work on the deduction so that way all taxpayers get a tax cut. But we definitely need to drive down our top rates. You know, we're sort of an island with our top tax rate here in Wisconsin. We need to drive that down and beat our neighbors.
Okay, welcome, Speaker Vos. Congratulations on your reelection. And, well, here you go. And being reelected Speaker, longest-serving Speaker in state history, keeping the streak going.
I now know why people haven't made it this long.
After a certain point in time, it's like, yeah, well, now I get it, right? Okay, so what about your caucus and $6.6 billion?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to all of the folks, not just here in the room, but across the state, who participated in the electoral process in November. Not all of us chose the same candidates, but it doesn't matter because the past is the past, and now we need to move on. I will say that for those of us who spent the summer out talking to people, not just going to a county party office, Republican or Democrat, where you kind of reinforce what you think you already know, but actually knocking on doors, talking to strangers, people who might not agree with you. Frankly, when they open the door, you have no idea if they're going to think you're awesome or awful. That is a different way of getting the pulse of the electorate than somebody who runs statewide. Somebody running statewide, again, you reinforce the base. You spend a lot of time watching TV at your own commercials. You are not out and about anywhere near as much as those of us who have to campaign door to door. So I do want to give a big shout out to the person who did the most doors with me in the room over the course of the summer. Let's give a big round of applause for my wife, Michelle. Yep. Because I think it's fair to say that all of us who've been in politics know that while the candidate gets some of the glory and most of the grief, the spouse or the family really gets an awful lot of the bad part of the equation. So for everybody who does that, thank you. So the fun part of running is the opportunity after the election to be able to talk about what you're going to do next and what you can offer for the state. I feel like we had put together a lot of good ideas and things that we thought could make Wisconsin a better place. When I went door to door, I heard kind of 4 or 5 different themes. I heard an awful lot of folks talking about inflation, no surprise. That is something that every one of us is dealing with on a regular basis, no doubt about that. We went to get groceries the other day, and you constantly are shocked at the price of objects that you are buying, either food or other products in the grocery store, versus what they were a year ago. That's something that everybody is dealing with on a regular basis, because I still have to buy my own groceries. I don't have a chef. We don't have anybody that cooks for us at the mansion, right? I mean, so we have to actually buy our food. So we know how impactful that is on every single family. The second thing people would talk about much more than anything is they wanted people to work to get things done. I would say a significant number of people said, you know, you need to work harder to accomplish what you believe in if they were Republican, right? Fight harder. You know, if you just worked harder, Robin, you could get the Democrats to override Governor Evers. Okay. You know, a lot of things like that where people don't necessarily understand the process, but I would spend some time educating them. But they want us to get things done. And then it would be a fairly sharp drop-off after that. I did not have a lot of people say, you need to spend more money on this program or that program. Actually, very rarely did I have people say, you need to spend more money on X, Y, or Z. They did oftentimes talk about the fact that their parents had left and moved to a lower tax state. They're in Florida, Tennessee, Texas, taking their wealth or just their pension and going somewhere else. I think that is a huge problem demographically for Wisconsin, because we know that when somebody moves and leaves Wisconsin as a resident, rarely do they come back until they are sick and in need of services. We have to figure a way to keep successful people who have built up wealth or a pension over time in Wisconsin after they retire, so they don't just come back when they need their benefits. The second thing that I heard, kind of fairly common, was they need to figure a way to keep younger people here. And that is not just college graduates. That is too stereotypical. It's all young people. We do not have enough workers. When I talk to most business owners, they focus on the idea that we have a real challenge in every single field you can imagine. from veterinarians to the dental hygienist, the guy who picks up your garbage, to the person who builds your house. Every single career field, we need to do a better job with that. And then lastly, I would say people focus on just the general idea of what are we doing with government, making sure that we are able to keep people and pay people. So when you think about all those topics, I feel like there are areas of potential agreement with Democrats, going back to number 2, where people want us to find ways to work together. I don't know how any Democrat can't say fixing our tax code so that we keep younger people here instead of moving away and successful folks instead of retiring somewhere else should not be a goal for Wisconsin. We want to keep everybody here to say maybe it's 5 months in Florida and 7 months here as opposed to the reverse. I think that should be a way, like Senator LeMahieu said, where we can find some consensus to say we're going to invest in priorities that are important, but we are certainly going to focus on the most important thing, which is returning the money that was overpaid by the taxpayers back. So if you put in my order, and I've had discussions with our leadership team, we're caucusing later today, but I think it's fair to say that our first priority would be cutting taxes as much as we possibly can while still funding core services. The second would be we're going to keep the money in our savings account. I would rather keep it in the savings account than expand the size of government. And then the last option would be to have a stalemate where nothing occurs. So I hope some continuum of reducing taxes while funding services, realizing keeping money in the account is not bad. It is better than growing the size of government.
Okay, so Governor Evers did propose during the campaign, I think twice, to just give money directly back to taxpayers in a rebate without a structural tax change. So are you two opposed to that idea?
So we tried that under Governor Walker, and I did not think it was anywhere near as successful as it should have been. Just sending out a check to everybody who happens to live in the state doesn't necessarily serve a purpose to say to people, stay in Wisconsin, don't move, relocate business here, any of the potential benefits that you would get by structural reform. So I thought it was gimmicky. I said it at the time. It's no different now. It needs to be long-term. It needs to be permanent. And I think those are things that we can hopefully find a way to rally around. Okay.
So my biggest concern sort of going into this budget cycle is not the surplus, not, the rainy day fund that we have going into it, everything. It's just what the federal economy is going to do going forward. Are we going to hit a recession? So you might make the argument that maybe give some of the surplus back right away, but I think the best way to make Wisconsin competitive going forward is to make permanent tax changes, not a gimmicky one-time thing. And we have enough money to do that and make transformational once-in-a-generation tax changes while still investing in core government functions and, maintaining our rainy day fund and still having probably a balance at the end. That's how good our economic situation is right now.
Okay, so you mentioned about bringing Democrats along, and Governor Evers has already, I think, when asked, to react to the change in the top tax rates, said he couldn't see himself signing that. So it goes to the relationship, I guess, between your houses and the governor, which has been terrible, really. Let's face it. There hasn't been much of a relationship at all. Now he signed the big tax cut bill, but not because there was a lot of negotiations that made that happen. So I think I and a lot of people in the room are wondering, so is this just going to be a repeat this session? You guys pass a bunch of bills, he vetoes a bunch of bills, on major legislation, and maybe he signs the budget? Or is there going to be like real give and take and seeking that middle ground so that maybe achieve some of the things you heard at the doors? Go ahead, Senator. So
you're correct. The relationship has not been best for the 2 years that I've been the majority leader. So I will break some news here. So the governor left a message for both of us a little while ago. The speaker can relay what his conversation was with the governor. I've not had a chance to call him back yet, but I'm hoping that this is a sign of things to come, that the governor actually is willing to sit down with us on a hopefully regular basis, work with us, because I think we can get some things done. I think I mean, one of our caucuses may be a little tougher than the other caucus, but, I think if we can get some big wins, we can also give on some issues and find some of that common ground and negotiate. I don't want to be sitting here in 4 years with, $30 billion in a surplus because we can't get anything done for the next governor. Granted, if interest rates are still up, I guess we'll be earning some good interest on that $30 billion sitting there. But no, I mean, if we have an opportunity to invest in, K-12 education and expand school choice, that'd be amazing. If we, whatever other things, or invest in education and get transformational tax cuts, but it has to be a give and take. We have 2/3 of seats. The Assembly has a nice majority, so there's not a mandate on either side. And as the Speaker said earlier, people who aren't knee-deep in politics and have a vested interest in one side winning or the other, they'd like to see things get done. And I think 70% of the state would welcome investment in education, tax reduction, investment in K-12 education, investment in transportation. And, if we can actually sit down and maybe work on some things, hopefully we can get some of that done.
So if you think about what I have said since the election, look, I am willing to go to our caucus and advocate for more money for public schools. I think that's good for our state. I think school choice is good for our state. It's kind of settled law. That doesn't seem to me to be an outrageous position on either side, because we all know, even when the Democrats had total control of state government, they didn't repeal school choice. So it's kind of settled. So I wouldn't think that should be a big argument that we have to, huff and puff about. But an example would be, putting that out there shows that I'm willing to give and take, just like Devin said. I am waiting for Governor Evers to say, short of things he knows we could never do, where are some areas that he's willing to give and take on? Perhaps his party believes that X should happen, but he's willing to flex off of that because that's how negotiation actually occurs. So Governor Evers and I did speak for, 5 minutes, which was good because that was 5 minutes more than in the past 2 years. So I give him credit for reaching out. But we did talk about the fact that, you have to sit down and negotiate, and it's not going to be staff to staff. That's not the way it's ever been. I have talked to previous speakers and previous legislators. That's not the way it occurs. It is the majority leader and the speaker sitting down with the governor, finding areas of common ground, and it means flexing. Doesn't mean you give up on your principles. Doesn't mean that you do things that you think are wrong for the state. But I think we can all recognize that not every single thing you believe is a bedrock principle that can never flex, right? So my hope is that we start to see from Governor Evers some examples where he would be willing to flex from his own base, because I haven't really seen those yet.
Okay, so is there a meeting scheduled? Did you arrange a meeting, or what's the deal?
Actually, he did offer, his staff offered one date. That one date doesn't work.
Thanksgiving Day? What are you doing?
Yeah, hey, maybe he asked us over for Thanksgiving. You never know, right?
That would
We're
be
not
nice.
quite there yet. We're not
You're not budget.
Yeah.
All right.
But I will say, I just want to give him credit. I mean, we are going to find a time to be able to sit down, have that beginning discussion. I did reiterate that there's no microphones in the room, and he agreed. So we know how the last meeting went. So we got to kind of get beyond all those things and realize we just got to move on.
Elephants never forget. Okay. Okay, define universal school choice, because that's a fairly new term for me. I'm sorry. And what's it mean and what's it cost?
So number one, if you think about where school choice in Wisconsin is right now, it has gradually been growing over time, and eventually there'll be no cap on the number of kids statewide who have the ability to participate in any district. So that is an automatic, built into the law, that is going to happen, period. We do know there are some challenges on the public school side. We also have school choice. It's called open enrollment, where you can go from one public school to another. But public schools have the opportunity to block that. They can say, we don't want to let the child go, or we don't want to accept the child. I would think there's a prime example that we could get rid of the ability for a school district to say no. So a parent gets to make the choice between leaving the public school in one town and going to the public school next door. I don't know why that would be controversial. That, to me, is a part of universal school choice. I would say the same.
Well, you'd have to compensate the district that was losing a child that had a per pupil credit for it, right?
That already happens.
Okay.
That already happens
Okay.
where money follows the child in the public school.
Okay.
It follows the child in the private school. So we want to be able to have those things. So I prefer that if you are in the Burlington district and you decide to go to Union Grove, I think it should be easy, accessible, with very few bureaucratic limitations. Now, in that scenario, going from Burlington to Union Grove, they don't ever ask what your income is. You can be in poverty or the richest couple in town, and you both get the opportunity to leave one public school and go to the other. Well, if it's good enough to go from one public school to another, and we've already accepted that school choice is settled law, I don't know why we couldn't say pick any school that you want, public or private.
Okay, so when there was a strong parochial school system, I went to Catholic school for 8 years, and I don't know how many Catholic schools there are around now. And there's some Lutheran schools, but there's not really a strong outstate. If you say universal school choice, a lot of people's only choice is the public school district, and they identify with it and they want it to excel. So what does universal school choice do for those people?
Well, again, it says that if you're a parent in a town with no private school option, but you want to go to another public school that's close, the bureaucracy couldn't say no. I think that's something that we should all be able to rally around, because the parents are the ones who make the best choice for their kids, not a bureaucrat simply saying, I'm sorry, we're not going to let any kids go, or we're not going to accept any new kids, right, as long as they have room in the school. I would say secondarily, these income limits, they are arbitrary. They make no sense. I think income limits could go away just like they are for public schools. I would love to have an opportunity to talk about the funding balance between what we give for a child who goes to a private school under the choice program and what we give to a public school student. I think most parents have no idea statewide how much we spend per pupil on education. Because if you take a survey, walking door to door, and ask what we spend in that school per child, no one gets it right. I can tell you, I've asked. No one gets it right. The average statewide, I believe, is about $16,000. So you start to do the math. $16,000, 20 kids in a classroom. Holy moly, that's not going to the teacher. There's a lot of bureaucracy and things that have been built up over time that, to me, are frustrating because they don't have a direct impact on the educational value that child is receiving. The other thing that I would say, as part of some kind of an education deal, in addition to universal school choice, which again is for public and private, I want to make sure I'm very clear about that. This is not just more options to go to private school. It is more options to get an education, period, public or private. But we also need to have accountability. We have had DPI kind of rejigger the results to make it seem like kids are doing better than they are. We know from the data that they are going away from having, kids take ACT scores to get into college because they don't want to show how bad a lot of our kids are doing. The only way that you fix a problem is admitting that you have it and putting a plan together to fix it. And what we are doing instead is kind of glossing over it, hoping that we don't take tests anymore, we don't have the same kind of requirements, we don't want to hold kids accountable, or the parents, the schools, or the families. And then in the end, who hurts? It's the kids who end up getting an education that they can't succeed with. So there's a lot of things that I think we could put together in an education package that focuses around increasing access to public and private.
Okay, Senator, I know the Senate and the Assembly agree on every single thing, so you must agree with everything that he just said. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, yeah,
but
It's a lot better since the sheriff's been gone.
Okay, so anyway, how is that you in general agreement with the idea of the concept universal school choices?
Yeah, no, I think what we found in 2020 when schools were shut down and parents were stuck at home, looking into what their kids were learning, some of the things being taught in public schools, and some of these schools never opening again for another year, is parents became aware of what was going on in their kids' education, some who hadn't taken an active role. And that's the frustration we've been hearing from parents over the last 2 years. I know personally many people who weren't under the income limits who took their kids out of public education, sent them to private education because they're just frustrated with what happened during the pandemic, and they've started looking into their kids' curriculum and things like that, and they're like, why the heck are they teaching them this? They're in second grade. They should be teaching them to read and write at this point. So anything that we can do to give more opportunity to parents. The great thing, I think, that resulted in all of this is that locally, there have been a lot of parents who've stepped up, run for the school boards. There's been a lot of parental involvement locally, which is fantastic. But what we can do to give parents those opportunities to have that option, I think our caucus would be totally in agreement with. And this is, if we're negotiating on this, moving the football is also an option. Maybe we don't get all the way to universal school choice, whatever that means, and however much that costs. But if raising how much the voucher goes with the kids, expanding the income level, maybe not lifting it, but expanding it even more. I mean, I think those things are all on the table as long as we continue to move in the right direction.
Okay, now there was an election on November 8th. I don't know whether you guys were aware of that, but there were a lot of referenda on the ballot, and a lot of them were local spending issues, right? We're used to the school spending issues. $1.7 billion were approved on November 8th. But there were also $11.2 million in tax levy increases for public safety. So I guess the question, and shared revenue being a big part of any budget discussion, and maybe more so this year since there's that big surplus, is when you see these kind of people are voting to tax themselves, right, in rich districts or rich areas primarily. So does that mean that the shared revenue system is broken?
There was also a very important election on August 5th. Isn't that right, Mr. Speaker? Sorry, that joke fell flat.
Most of mine do too, so it's perfectly acceptable. There's been a good discussion about shared revenue and local funding. I've already met with, I know the counties, the league, and the towns are working on some options, sort of to tie that funding to revenue source which may increase over time, such as the sales tax. And, I think that's a good discussion to have, to make sure that whatever funding we have going to local governments has an opportunity to grow going forward. With local governments, with local education, with state agencies, we're seeing the same inflationary pressures that private businesses are seeing. So we need to acknowledge that. We're probably going to have some tough discussions about correctional officers. How do we make sure that we have staffing at our state institutions? DA, ADA pay, because we're having a hard time in Sheboygan County. We have, I believe, 10.5 authorized DAs and ADAs, and we have like 3 of them filled right now because they can't find anybody. So this is putting a strain on the whole system as a whole. So I think local governments, we understand the challenge that they're facing, and they're working hard to find some creative solutions. And the good thing about having a $6.6 billion projected surplus is hopefully we can invest in some of these areas that are facing these inflationary pressures and try to find solutions that work. Okay, so the way I heard it is the proposal is take 1% of the sales tax and give it to locals to be divided on some formula or whatever, not school districts, but munis and counties, and then it would grow along with the sales tax, and then locals would have a stake in the growing of the economy. Is that concept? That sounds like a really good concept, and one that even I can explain. So, is that a good idea?
Well, we're talking about that. We're not going to decide it right now.
Come on.
Yeah, exactly. But we are trying. I mean, I think Devin articulated very well part of the problems that local governments are having. So, but I also want to be honest to say that not every local government is created equal in how they have dealt with the efficiencies that they have either found or not found in the way that they operate. So I am reluctant to lock in municipalities like my own, Racine County, where they don't have a sales tax. They run incredibly efficiently and are consistently one of the highest performers under almost any metric, versus another county which has a sales tax and has a significantly higher spend with lower results. So just like we made a decision in the early 1990s to kind of lock in the formula, and we did 2/3 funding of school districts, resulting in a huge disparity between low spending and high spending that, frankly, we still deal with 25 years later. I want to find an answer that helps to deal with that disparity. So if you have been frugal, you are not punished for that. If you have been profligate, you do not end up benefiting from that. So that's part of the discussion that we have to have. But, on correction officers, because that's just one example if people think of how all of us as employers are facing challenges. So about 25% of state employees are correctional officers. They work in Department of Corrections. Of the 25% of employees who work for the state in corrections, approximately 25% of those in the entire DOC are vacant positions. So imagine that, 25% vacant, 23%, but 25%. But in security, those who work directly in corrections, it's 1/3. We have some prisons with over 50% vacancy rate. So I had a constituent when I walked door to door in Sturtevant, I have a prison in Sturtevant, who was telling me about how often he is forced to do a second shift. So imagine yourself. You are making $20.80 an hour. I think that's the starting wage for a prison guard. You work your 8-hour shift. You are forced to stay for your second 8. You then drive half an hour home, try to get to sleep, wake up half an hour early, and you are right back there knowing that you could be forced a second day for 2 shifts. I mean, imagine no matter what the pay is, just think of the lifestyle choices that people are going to have to make. So, we encouraged Governor Evers. We passed a bill. He did it anyways, to require a dramatic increase in pay for correctional officers. I think it was $4 an hour. That each dollar increase for corrections is $25 million per year. So $1 over the biennium, $50 million. $4 over the biennium just for correctional officers, $200 million. And that just gets them to where the pay is right now with a 50% vacancy rate at some prisons. So we have legitimate, serious problems that we have to focus on, and that's where I think Devin's right. We have to make some investments. We have to make decisions to say, if you can work at, if you can work at Walmart, one of our sponsors, thank you. If you can work at Walmart and you are able to make $20 or $25 an hour after a few years on the job as an assistant manager, it's very hard for me to say somebody who's a correctional officer doing a job that I would argue is tougher than working in retail, and they are going to make less. So we have to figure a way to change that. I would think, again, that'd be an area that Republicans and Democrats could say, if we're going to have a function of state government, it should be staffed and people should be able to have a career where they can, earn a decent living and also not be forced into a job where you would never stay over time in a job like that. And I think we're suffering because of it.
So one more, thank you for that. One more thing on the shared revenue. So if you did this thing, and I'm not saying you are, you're saying you guys are talking about it, but that would seemingly put all the local tax option stuff off the table. You wouldn't have to, would that be an additional thing you'd allow locals to do? Like that's what Milwaukee has been screaming for.
Revenue without reform isn't going to happen.
So you don't like local tax options. You continue to not like local tax options, and is that correct?
I guess let me look at it from my own perspective. I don't want to speak for Devin, but I look at when we put in effect this idea for a 0.5% sales tax for counties, right? If you remember, the entire reason for it was for property tax relief. That's the rationale we used. Now, almost no counties are using it for property tax relief. Now, to the credit of like Walworth County, if you look at your county tax bill in Walworth County, 100% of the sales tax is a direct reduction in your property taxes. That's what the legislature intended when I went back and talked to the authors of the proposal and looked at what they did in, I think it was 92. That's what they intended. Only a few did it that way. Every other person, every other entity just increased spending, which that's why I am so reluctant to say, let's just give them 1% more, because they've been awful in how they manage the money in the past, but they're going to change. It's going to be totally different now, right? Because we've now seen over and over and over where it just is more of the same. So I'm waiting, and I've been saying this over and over, I am waiting for the reform proposals that get matched with new revenue, but it almost always focuses just give us the revenue, and we'll figure that out later, as they create goofy positions inside government, as they do all this DEI mumbo-jumbo, all this stuff that is clearly not a core function of government, and they are choosing to spend their money there, while at the same time saying we don't have enough for the core functions of making sure we have police, making sure we have fire, making sure we have all the rest.
Okay, so you're against local tax options. Okay. Do you agree with that? Okay, so back to this election thing that happened. So there was supposed to be a red wave, then there wasn't going to be a red wave, then there was going to be another red wave again. So what happened was both your caucuses gained seats. Ron Johnson wins re-election by 27,000 votes, and you win the state treasurer's race. Do Republicans have a statewide election problem? Senator.
So locally we don't have. In the state senate we do not have an election problem. So we had essentially 4 to 5 higher profile races in the state senate. I still have not done a complete analysis on it, but I know in at least 3 of those 5 our candidates way outperform even Ron Johnson, because our candidates are out there working, they're talking to local people, they know what's important in their areas. We do recently have had a problem statewide, but as you can see, it was nationally, where Republicans didn't hit the red wave that they thought they were going to.
Right, only one governor, I believe, only one Republican won a governor's race, an open seat, or is that right? Or I think, yeah.
Yeah, incumbents were winning everywhere, especially Democrat incumbents, statewide positions. I think the biggest problem that we have, well, there's a few problems that I think led into this election cycle. So, like the speaker spent a lot of time knocking in his own district, but I spent time knocking on districts all around the state, and obviously we're doing a lot of polling. So I think there was 3 reasons sort of leading up to the results that happened. The first is the overturn of the Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision. I think that was undercaptured in all of our polling. We thought, sort of the hypothesis, I think, which was why people thought Ron Johnson was going to win by 3 and Tim Michels was going to win by 1, was because in past we've had Republicans underpolled because they were unwilling to talk to pollsters. I think we may have seen that with women this time, unwilling to tell pollsters their true feelings on it. We always saw that abortion was usually hit 3rd on our interest list when people, but it was all, if you look at the crosstabs, it was all Democrat voters. So that was driving their enthusiasm to go out there and vote. I think I said 3, maybe I'll just talk about 2 of them. The other is the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. There's a reason why Romaine Quinn won the 25th Senate District by 14 points. 14 points. One that was just held for the last 25 years by a Democrat. It was because of Donald Trump. Romaine Quinn was a great candidate. He was out there working hard. But the reason we're doing well in those, and still doing well, and Ron Johnson captured that Trump enthusiasm out there, but there's just simply more suburban voters in the WOW counties and the BOW counties, that there's a percent of Republicans who are so turned off by Donald Trump. I talked to, and this is only anecdotal, but I talked to someone, Ron Johnson, Tony Evers voter, and the only reason why was because Trump endorsed Michels. That was the only reason why. He's like, she said, I will never vote for someone who goes to Donald Trump and asks for an endorsement. I just won't do it. And that's the reality that our party has to face, and hopefully we get it right in the next presidential primary.
Well, it's going to have a convention in Milwaukee, so better get ready. All right, so you actually dealt with Donald Trump personally.
Yes, I did.
And how do you feel about those passionate voters?
Well, let me start by saying Devin's right. I met those same voters going door to door. And I was always shocked where somebody would said, pre-primary, so early in the summer, I would go door to door in June and July, and I would have all these people saying, oh, you're too close to Donald Trump. I hate Donald Trump. I hate you, right? The fact that you two are tied at the hip, I'm done with you, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Then I'd go to the next door, and they would say, "You're not working enough with Donald Trump." And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, this is bad." Right? So that was kind of the early summer, which is why I'm like, something's got to be different, or this isn't going to work out well for Robin. But frankly, we go through the entire process, and that was the catharsis for me that happened over the course of the election, right? Is that I would knock on a door, and you literally, and these were identified Republicans because we had a primary, right? And you would have no idea where the person was, because you could have a yard with the biggest American flag and every stereotype of what you think is a Donald Trump voter, and they walk out and they tell you how they hate him and they voted for, Joe Biden, right? Or you could go to a yard where you thought this person is definitely on the other team, and it was the opposite, right? So there was no real way to kind of navigate other than by just trying to knock on the door saying, hello, and you kind of just pick it up as you go. But I will say Donald Trump did good things. He brought new people into the party. He expanded the reach. He made people who didn't think they were Republican feel like somebody was fighting for them, right? So he did some good things to expand the party. Because, again, I met folks that if I would have stereotyped 5 years ago, I would have said these are not our people. And I would have been wrong, right? Because people can be persuaded. That's the whole point of campaigns. I do think that, my excellent, awesome decision to hire Mike Gableman, my proudest moment of my speakership, right? Right? I think that had some sway in making the decision for some people harder, because I would have people also say to me, oh, you hired this Mike Gableman, blah, 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 blah. But what's weird is I am convinced that if Donald Trump had not endorsed my primary opponent, I could have lost, right? I was shocked at how many people, after he endorsed my primary opponent, I would knock on doors and they would say, I wasn't going to vote for you, but the fact that you're not with Trump, I'm with you now, right? Which, again, if you would have stereotyped that, I would have said that's not possible. And frankly, the fact that Donald Trump continued this unbelievable vendetta, whatever you want to call it, because we would not overturn the election, I got more votes in 2022 than I did in 2018, right? So obviously Donald Trump's reach is nowhere near as deep as he believes it is, right? I think we now see that across the country. So for all the good things that Donald Trump did to expand our party, sometimes you have to be willing to step aside and say the greater good of what I believe in is more important than my own ego. And that's where I hope Donald Trump will eventually get to. Because is he the strongest candidate to run in 2024? I think everybody could agree there are other people who can fight just as hard, have the same conservative beliefs, but have the ability to attract some of those people that we talk to that are Republican and believe in what we do, but just dislike his style or the way he operates. So I think for the good of the party, eventually Donald Trump is going to realize that, or the voters are going to remind him that they're the ones really in charge.
Okay, so now we're going to go out to questions from the audience. Michelle, I'm sorry, you cannot ask a question. All right, we got a little bit of time here, so raise your hands, don't be shy. Rolf, go ahead, shout it out, man.
Running for re-election in 2024?
Well, that's okay. That's a bold question. Are you guys running for re-election in 2024?
I'm not on the ballot.
Not on the ballot.
I always plan to run for re-election. So I will be honest and say that if Tim Michels had won, I had thought about riding off into the sunset, realizing that we have an incredibly capable, conservative leader that can be, somebody who can help transform our state. Now we have Tony Evers. So obviously I'll make a decision in the future, but I'm planning on it right now.
All right, that turns out to be a really good question, Rolf. All right, other questions over here. Go ahead. Shout it out.
How concerned are you that Trump will become an independent and take voters with him?
How concerned are you that Trump will become an independent when he loses the nomination and then take your voters away and hand the election over to Democrats? Go ahead, Senator, go ahead. Since you're not on the ballot, you can say all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. I've not been on Trump's plane. No, I I don't know if that's possible, your scenario, if he loses a primary, unless he drops out early if he's losing, to run as an independent. I don't think that would work to get on the ballot in most states. I think he would have to be an independent right away.
That's fake news. No, I'm not sure about the mechanics of it,
Right.
but like if he didn't look like he was going to win the nomination, let's say, and then he just says, well, I'm taking my, yeah.
But Devin's point is right, though, because I've done some research. Most states have a sore loser law, where if you choose to run picking one party and you are not successful, you do not get the opportunity to continue running. You're not allowed to be on the ballot. I think we should have that, right, for a whole lot of reasons. But I think that's why most states have that, because you want to be able to say you're running as an independent, you're running as a Republican or a Democrat, you pick your path, and you don't just get to keep going if you lose.
Okay. So, well, do you fear that he's going to divide the party so much that it's going to result and have the same result?
I guess I don't, because I think most people on the conservative side realize that the problem are liberals. They are not other conservatives. So I think Donald Trump's entire brand has been about being a fighter and stopping the woke left, all which makes him appealing. But if he is the reason that a Democrat is elected in 2024, not only does that ruin his brand and his persona, don't forget he's got a whole business empire that is going to be severely hurt if people think that he is the reason Democrats win.
I don't think he'll run as an independent right away. But if he does, that would be disastrous. I mean, we'd see what we had with, what was that third party guy? Ross Perot. It'd be another Ross Perot scenario where a president would win with 44% or something like that.
Right. Clinton was a minority elected president at first. Okay, in the back.
Okay, my question for you is, do you think that a non-Trump, very professional Republican, no association with Trump, who's really polished, will go back and getting the kind of numbers that, say, Scott Walker got in the ball counties and these ball counties?
So do you have somebody in mind?
Hypothetical type candidate who is very polished, non-Trump Republican, or are there structural changes in the politics of those specific areas? I'm thinking wow and wow. Sure.
Well, and not to take anything away from John Leiber, who I think did a good job running for state treasurer, right? But if you think about any race in the state where 98% of the people could not name either of the two candidates, it would be state treasurer. Right? Because I would think you can't think of anybody who really knew who both of them were for the most part, unless you're a professional. So that, in my mind, is kind of a statewide generic ballot test. So literally it was 50-50 with a small lean for Republicans. Right? You look at every other race, they either had an incumbent, natural advantage, or they had somebody who was well known on our side. Right? So I think we start with an even state with perhaps a small GOP advantage. So if you have somebody who has the ability to appeal to people in the middle, and that, again, never means compromising your principles, but if you look at somebody like a Glenn Youngkin or a Ron DeSantis or a Rick Scott, all of whom have run and done better than the average person in their state, they have done something. I mean, you look at most of the races where you had a U.S. Senate candidate and a governor candidate. You know, even in Iowa, which had been a competitive state, Kim Reynolds, fantastic, articulate, bright, newer governor, did great, did better than average. You look at what happened in Georgia, Ohio, Oklahoma, all these states where you had articulate governors that did better than normal. I think that is an easy formula for us to see again with somebody running in Wisconsin.
No, that was very well said. Nice job. No, there's always sways in. I mean, the district that I currently represent in the Senate 20 years ago was held by Democrats, and Joe Libam won that seat went to a recount, and there's a natural sway. I think part of that in the state is the Democrats have moved so far away from rural people in Wisconsin is part of the reason why we built up. Part of it is Trump, but even before Trump was on the scene, you know, some of the more rural areas of the state were trending more Republican, but I think at the heart of things in, you know, suburban Wisconsin, you know, parents care or people care about their education, making sure they have the best education for their kids, and they're concerned about pocketbook issues. And those are things that I think we have the winning message on, and we can, as long as we, as the speaker said, if there is a good, articulate, conservative candidate, we should be able to win the state again.
And just one quick addition. So think about this election cycle and take it off the statewide candidates, but look at the candidates who ran for the legislature, right? We had 3 districts that we took away from the Democrats, and if you look at each of those 3 districts, they were 50-50, right? 50 Biden, 50 Trump, or 50.5 one, 50.5 the other. So they were the quintessential election when, if you're a Democrat, you should be able to win these seats. And what happened in all 3 circumstances? Republicans won because I think we had better candidates, better organization, and a better message, even in a year when it might have been more challenging for us than normal. So that's how you win. I think that's why it's same with Romaine. Look at that overperformance. I mean, that's amazing. Again, he gets his training in the assembly, so it makes it easier, right? But, good job.
All my assembly candidates overperformed. It was amazing. It was amazing.
Sean, you going to ask a question, or can I move on? Do you have a question?
Workforce training. You talked about that. Obviously, you're a small business owner. What do you do in areas like rural Wisconsin where we're looking for employees over and over working cheese plants, dairy farms? You go to that committee on supply chain management.
Don't get choked up, Sean. So, what about workforce development issues to small business owner Robin Vos?
Well, the first thing we have to do is make it so that people know they have to work to eat. I think that we have done not enough of that. I mean, when COVID hit, we formed a very large, very deep hammock for people to be able to utilize. And some of them were really needed. When you lose your job, you need unemployment. I don't fault people for that. But when you have every single business that I tour saying we could hire people tomorrow, that means that nobody should be on unemployment or nobody should be on bonus food stamps. Because remember, all those programs that were started in the pandemic, a lot of them are still going, even though the pandemic is long over and the economy is already recovered and headed back into a recession. And all of that has been without us making people re-qualify for Medicaid, re-qualify for food stamps, all things that were a natural part of our process where you would go on short-term benefits, leave, find a job, and kind of work your way through the process. So we passed legislation that Governor Evers vetoed to say that, you can't be on food stamps forever. You can't be on Medicaid forever. And he thinks you should. Well, I think that's causing people to stay on benefits forever, and that means not working.
Okay, I'm going to just move along here. You got the last question. Oh, no, I'm going to have the last question, but you have the next to last question. Make it a good one. So this was obviously a planted question for you guys. So this was, the questioner says, there's all this federal money coming in, and what is the accounting of where it went? Why can't you get your arms around that? Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, we've been trying to get answers on that. We've been stonewalled pretty much at every direction. I think I haven't actually talked to the speaker about this, so maybe I'll make breaking news here. I think we need to use the Joint Audit Committee to look into some more targeted areas like that, dig into where this, maybe not exactly that area, but I think instead of doing some of the more broader audits that we've done in the past, be a little more targeted with our auditing to check some of these areas like that, which it seems like there may be some wasteful and not guardrails put around how all this money was spent. Look forward to having that discussion with the speaker going forward.
Great idea.
Okay, so final question. We'd like to get you out of here on time. So there's a massive Supreme Court election coming up. And I've heard some tacticians say, well, the Republican legislature should do something to kind of take some of the heat off the Dobbs decision in advance of this election, because otherwise Republicans will lose it and then the court will go into liberal hands. So what about this election, and what can you do to maybe help your candidate, who I assume must be Justice Kelly at the moment, unless Duro gets in?
So we spent 4 years, I think, trying to show the contrast between where Republicans would be if given the chance and where Governor Evers was leading our state. I think he made dozens and dozens of bad decisions and a few good ones. Now, he chose to spend millions of dollars bragging about the tax cut he had nothing to do with but the 5-second signature, right? That's the only thing he really was proud of if you look at what he ran on for the $100 million worth of commercials. So it's why when I look at this, I realize that we passed legislation to make it harder to stay on welfare, right? We passed legislation to say lock people up. We passed legislation to make sure that people understood that we wanted to have accountability in schools, all of which Governor Evers vetoed, and all of which, unfortunately, our candidate chose not to use in his advertising during the campaign. So why? You'd have to ask. I don't know. But I would say that the impact of the legislature on any statewide candidate is muted, right? I mean, it's going to be mostly the candidate, their campaign, their ability to articulate a message, put together one that's compelling to get people to vote for them. But I do believe that, as I said before, people want us to find ways to make progress on issues. And if the options are keep the status quo, which means there are challenges with our abortion law, some of the way that it was written in 1849, we could update it while still being strongly pro-life. That is not impossible to do. I ran for office saying that I support exceptions. It is less than 1% of the time, but it is some of the most egregious cases. I think we could still be strongly pro-life and show that in cases where someone wants to have an organ transplant or somebody is the victim of a sexual assault, that we could find a way to generate that consensus. If Governor Evers' position and that of liberals is it's abortion all the way until the baby's head is coming out of the birth canal, I think that is incredibly extreme. So my hope is that even though Governor Evers has said we're not going to find consensus and that it should all be decided by the courts, I think what the U.S. Supreme Court just said is we don't want courts making those kind of decisions because they should be elected officials respecting what each of the three branches do. Make the laws, execute the laws, interpret arguments between the two. That's really what the three branches do. We don't articulate and say, well, these two can't agree, so we're just going to export it to this third branch of government for them to figure out the process for us. So I hope that is not the way that we would go, because then it abdicates the responsibility of the two lawmaking branches and those that execute. But that's where I hope Governor Evers would be willing to sit down and have a legitimate conversation to say, where is the middle ground that could be sustained? It's happened in other states. Strongly Republican legislatures have passed new legislation that have been mirrored on what I'm talking about. So it's not some kind of a sellout on the right, and it would be a reasonable way for us to find consensus so that, again, we don't have a Supreme Court race, which is supposed to be about dozens of issues and how you interpret the law, becoming about one topic, which, again, shouldn't be decided by a court if you look at the way our federal system's set up.
All right, so you're saying you'd like to do that before the Supreme Court election?
It's possible if we could find consensus.
Okay, and so, I mean, this is important in many respects, but for you two especially, they could rewrite the boundaries of the districts if it went to the if the court switched, right?
Why would they ever do that? The maps are good like they are.
Right. Then you can put that in a filing. Okay. Anyway, go ahead, Senator. I'm sorry.
So when the speaker started out, he said he's not sure, I think he used the word muted, on what the state legislature can do to influence statewide elections. If we pass an exception law and the governor follows through on his promise to veto it, I'm not sure that makes any difference at all in the Supreme Court race. That being said, I have 5 new caucus members out of my 22, so almost a quarter of my caucus is brand new. I'm currently sitting down with each of them individually, not only to talk about abortion, but also talk about committees and all kinds of other fun things, their agenda going forward. So I'm in the process of very early on getting to know, seeing where my current members are at, because, obviously the Dobbs decision is still brand new from a legislative standpoint, and, talking to the new members, and look forward to having those discussions with them and seeing where the caucus ends up.
See, he consults with his members all the time. Just kidding. All right.
Not all of them.
Yes. We shall not mention her name, right? Is that okay? All right, everybody. Okay, let's hear it for the sponsors and for our guests. Speaker Robin Vos, Senate Majority Leader LeMahieu.
This program is a production of Wisconsin Eye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. Wisconsin Eye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civic broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.
Wisconsin Eye relies on contributions from you. Your tax-deductible investment in WisEye supports access to unfiltered, beginning-to-end coverage of Campaign 2022 and state capitol proceedings, available to you 24/7. Help us reach our goal of raising $30,000 by making a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321. Thank you for your support.